Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Creativity Question. Today, I'm really over the moon for the guest we're having because we've known each other for a very long time. And she is a wonderful data designer, author, and educator. She co authored the Infographic History of the World, now published in 11 languages. And more recently, she created the Britannica Encyclopedia di Infographica, a visual encyclopedia for children featuring over 250 infographics. Her portfolio spans collaborations with startups, publishers, global brands, and cultural institutions, with projects showcased in books, exhibitions, and museum collections. She's delivered talks at TEDx, taught at Columbia Business School, led workshops for organizations such as Spotify, Pfizer, Pfizer, oh my God, this is really difficult, and the European Parliament. Outside her client work and teaching, she can be often found sketching ideas, mapping personal data, and most importantly, spending time with their children. So, welcome to Valentina D'Efilippo.
Thanks for having me, Fabi. Such a nice
Thank
thing to
you.
be here. Yeah, and wonderful actually that you started this podcast. I really enjoyed listening to the other episodes. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Vale. Thank you so much. As you know, as everyone knows by now, our first question and fundamental question of this podcast is, Vale, what does creativity mean to you?
Big question. And as I was just telling you offline before the recording button was pressed, I had actually a hard time this morning just sitting with a question before coming on. I was like, what is actually creativity and how does that differ to the design process? And I actually found myself having a really hard time just writing down one sentence because creativity, I believe, is so much and so many different things. But I would say that if I had to just define it with a few words, it's probably a way for me to make sense of the world, navigate the complexity of the world, and this world I'm kind of like referring as the outer world, so life out there, but also the inner world. What's happening with me? What's happening inside my world? And so I reach out to this creativity, this way of like understanding. So I suppose with that, if I had to really clarify what creativity is for me, I suppose it's just a way of discovering, understanding, questioning. It usually starts with a place of interrogation, curiosity, wanting to find out, asking the why of things, of like, like if you're have been exposed to kids, now I have two little kids, so I totally see where this is coming from. We have a moment in the development, probably around the age of 3, that we start really asking why of things, right? Like, hey, mom, why do we need to flush the water in the toilet? Where does it go? Like, and you try to give an answer and then they ask you why another 3 times, or why do we need to poo every day? Things like that. And you're like, I don't know. But yeah, like these crazy questions. And I guess like often it really starts with these, like just asking a question of something that happens in life that catches you and maybe it makes you feel uncomfortable, maybe it makes you feel like a moment of joy, maybe it makes you feel something, right? In that pause, the moment of like, I want to know more. I want to understand what's happening. I want to understand why I'm feeling that way. And this ability to maybe like pause and stay with this uncomfortable moment and pay attention. That's where creativity happens, right? Like it's this ability of like then starting to generate ideas and possible answer to this initial question. I suppose that would be my definition.
That's a really great definition that can spark so many more questions. I would have
Yeah.
asked you immediately what you can give us as an example of life or work that represents that, but I think you already answered that when like your children, for example, ask you questions. Do you have an example at work that you feel it's the moment where you have to apply that
Yeah, I would say any projects of mine really started with a question. So if I'm thinking about a question, for example, I was traveling 2009. I was in Japan. And for the first time, I saw the world map represented without Europe in the center, right? So the map of the world is 2D landscape, and Europe was not in the center, was Asia. And I had this moment of discomfort of like, hang on a minute, what's here? Why this frame? And do people actually see the world through this frame? That kind of question made me actually pursue this discovery journey through the 3 weeks that I spent in Japan. So as I was traveling and meeting local people, I asked a few people to draw the world map from memory. And this kind of like representation, they all portrayed the world map through this Asian center focus, right? Japan was in the center and then the world around them was mapped. It made me really understand how we have this innate egocentric way of seeing the world. As these creators, we put ourselves in the centers, and then we start to map the understanding of the world from this egocentric view. And that was just an intuition. That was just a moment of exploration that really gave me like almost like a creative seed to then start to develop my way of teaching other people to map data and understand the process of data visualization. So it's actually now the foundational part of all of my workshops and masterclasses. I start with this exercise where we all just draw the world map. And it's just a realization of like, the framing, the kind of biases that go into the process. And then on top of these maps, we also draw a data visualization that is based on personal stories. So yeah, I guess like it really just started with this like question of like, how do we see the world? And then can I use that and this exploration to actually teach how do we see data and how do we transform data as raw material into a compelling visual story, into a map, into a chart, into an infographic. Um, Similarly, like other projects started with questions like, how can I see why The Shining by Kubrick was such a piece of popular culture, or became such a piece of popular culture? So I wanted to understand why it became such a piece of popular culture in its rawest material, right? Like, what did it do? What did Kubrick do to actually engineer such a beautiful masterpiece? And I started to deconstruct it, and I started to kind of like collect all of this data and putting it back together. And through this analysis, I actually understood that everything was really well carefully, considered. And I created this data visualization, this data deconstruction of The Shining. It didn't really start with a data set. It started with a question I wanted to understand. Later on, years later, this project was actually done at LCC where we both studied together,
I
and I
do
had this
remember that.
archive. Yeah, and I had the Kubrick archive, and I was just reading all of the semiotics literature, right, on The Shining. I just wanted to see, I wanted to have evidence, and that was the creative process gave me, like a way to understand, a way to sit with these pieces, and then putting it back together to really explain also to other people what I had learned for myself. And similarly, years later, I went through a similar process of deconstruction with a song. So this Space Oddity by David Bowie. And similarly, I was sitting in a campsite with New Zealand. I was actually taking a break from work. I was on a sabbatical. And it was January 2016. David Bowie passed. And for the entire day, David Bowie was on radio, like all sorts of like music. And it was just a beautiful moment of connecting, right? On the opposite side of the world with people from all over the world. Everybody was singing his song. And it was just a beautiful moment of like, my God, this man just left behind this beautiful constellation of work that is still connecting people after decades, right? That this work was put out into the world. And that moment just gave me like maybe the seed for a creative process to then start. And a few weeks later, I kind of like sat with the moment and I thought, if I could actually use the work that I do, so data visualization, data storytelling, to create a tribute to this artist, to David Bowie, what could I do? And I reached out to a musicologist, Miriam Quick, who I had previously worked with on data storytelling projects, but I knew that she had a PhD in music. I thought she would be the best person to kind of like help me and inform the research part. And I reached out to her with just this really broad question of like, I would like to do a data visualization project on David Bowie. Um, Similarly to this The Shining visual deconstruction, I think there is so much through data that we can understand and kind of like unfold of this beautiful work. Yeah, and together we just embarked on this like crazy 1 year long project where we just went really narrow one song, Space Oddity, the song that launched David Bowie into fame, and we studied it. We learned everything that was possible to learn. We really like gathered all sorts of data from musical data, interpretative data. We actually asked people, about 50 people, how they felt while listening to the song. So we recorded emotional response. And it was a lot of like exploration and kind of like, and that's the beauty of the creative journey, is that you start with these investigative questions, but you don't really know where they're going to take you, right? There is a lot of uncertainty that you constantly need to embrace, of just like, I don't know the answers, but that's actually the reason why you're doing what we're doing, right? I think for me, that's the beauty of the creative process of like starting with a question that you want to figure out an answer. And then the creative process takes you into this mad, beautiful, joyful, but also very frustrating process of like figuring out what possible answer you can give to this initial question. So it's a bit of like a quest, I would say, is a journey, yeah.
That, yes, and that gave birth to a beautiful series of posters that I can see
Mhm.
behind you now.
We did some data sculptures on the vinyl, so we actually engraved our findings on 10 data sculptures and data visualization on LPs. And I thought, so for that, the idea was like, when the music was actually distributed, when the song was distributed back then, it was actually through the LP. And if you think about it, what is the LP? Is actually data visualization. The grooves, where the
Mm-hmm.
music is encoded, is data visualization. It's just invisible to the human eye, but it's been etched and engraved into the LP to be reproduced by the LP player. And I thought, what if I could actually expand these groups and make this data visible to humans and make it meaningful so that we can actually learn the beautiful layers hidden in space oddity. So that was the kind of like initial, maybe like map that I had in my head of like, okay, what do I want to actually reveal? And I want to look into these grooves and make this data visible.
You see, I think that that's what creativity is doing something, but also looking at it from a different point of view. And
Hmm.
you're always doing that. In every project I see that you publish or you do or you release, there's always that kind of, yes, this is something we've seen, but it's such an interesting new point of view that Valentina is applying to it. And I think that that's why so many people are drawn to your work. And it is also so fascinating to dive into your process and your way of thinking. And for that, I'd like to ask you one of the questions I always ask, which is, what are your influences when you first started, or influences in general for the way you think, the way you see the world? What are the first example of, I don't know, books or movies or whatever it is that you would say, these are some things that really triggered my interest in what I do and the way I think?
It probably actually goes back to even before I started to realize that there was a career in design or a passion. It's probably very foundational in the way that I was brought up. Creativity was all around me in the kind of like day-to-day life in very small manifestations. So often I kind of draw a parallelism or an analogy between what we're doing in the design process with cooking. And I think that was probably rooted in me by just seeing how my grandmothers were both these amazing um, chefs, like not professional chefs, but they were just amazing with food.
I
Come
mean,
from
hello,
Italy.
Italian women.
Exactly, Italian grandmother. It's just this beautiful craft, this appreciation for simple ingredients, really well curated together, knowing how to combine them, knowing what to use, but also being creative in the way that you're kind of like just use what there is around you. You open the fridge and you're able to put together like something that is not just a quick fix. But every day, my grandmother, especially one of them, was just able to really transform food, these simple ingredients, into something that would make your day just brighten up by just sitting at the table. This joyful moment that it's not just a functional, I'm just getting fed. I'm actually having a moment of comfort, of like just grounding and joy, and like you're feeding the body, but you're also feeding the soul. And it was always intentional, like it was never like she really took joy, and it was yeah, it was just like a way to express herself and her love for us. Um, so I think that was uh kind of like a really big thing, but also like my mom is a hairdresser, so it was like in a way, in her world, was like taking this raw material as well, the look of people and the hair, and transforming it to give beauty and to kind of like elevate the kind of like comfort or the confidence that the person felt with themselves, with these transformations. So I feel like there was probably just looking around me, people transforming these data points, like I see them as data points. For my grandma were ingredients, for my mom were like, visual patterns, and maybe like the way that people were carrying themselves and their hair, and putting it together and transforming it. And they were the creative process. And I think there was a core inspiration that we went into my own journey, into my own way of seeing the world. I suppose also the way that my brain is wired. Um, I was always very split in between science and art. So, in the system that we grew up in Italy, after junior high school, like when you're 14, at least back in the day, I actually don't know what is the system right now, the educational
Who
system, but you
knows?
had to pick high school, and it was very kind of defined, right? Like you either go to liceo scientifico, which is the scientific thing, or you go to liceo artistico, which is art, or classico, which is more like literature. And I was really having a hard time deciding. And I think it was really like a moment of realizing how my brain actually worked. I always worked quite well with it's kind of like interconnection of the analytical brain, but also the creative brain. So I went into study art for 2 years. And because my analytical brain was not stimulated enough, I felt incredibly frustrated. Although I was doing well at art, I didn't feel 100% satisfied. And then I took science for 3 years until university. And again, I was like really missing all of the hours I was spending painting and drawing and sculpting and doing all of the beautiful things I was doing at art. So when I came out of the high school, I was like, what can I study to actually satisfy both of these two sides of my brain? And I went into industrial design, because actually back then there wasn't a thing as data visualization. And in industrial design, though, there was this analytical aspect of problem solving and engineering and math and all of that, but also the creative expression, right, of creating something, of giving form to something that doesn't exist yet. And then actually through my studies, during my Erasmus program, when I moved to Spain, is when I realized the beauty of like visual communication and visual arts, because I was taking so many electives that they weren't possible in the Polytechnic of Turin. That was very kind of like fixed curriculum. But in Spain, I could actually just go and select electives. And I started to do branding and photography and graphic design. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Ah,
You can actually create something very quickly with the tools that you can use, rather than the engineering process of like going from a sketch into then production that might take 3 years to see, this initial sketch to actually being produced. And so there was really like the kind of like connection into the next phase of like what do I really want to do with this bipolar brain? And I wanted to create some sort of like visual communication, but had some sort of purpose as well. So I went to London, and that's where we met at the London College of Communication with this kind of like intention to really try to find a field where I could express these two sides of the brain. And luckily, actually, at London College of Communication, there was a really strong focus on information design, which had this like core foundational aspect of like why you're doing things. So it's not just typography, it's not just color theory. It's like, what is the story? What is the message that you want to communicate? It was such a focus, wasn't it? Like in really the purpose of your design and why you're doing certain things in a certain way. Obviously, there was a lot of focus on the craft as well. And yeah, then I got lost in advertising. My first job was actually advertising. And that's where I got stuck for like 3 years, and I was very unhappy. Despite the fact that, on paper it looked amazing. I was working for a really big advertising firm. People would have killed to actually get in there. And myself, I struggled, like to get the first full-time job. But actually getting in there, getting in the internship, and then they offered me a full-time job was just such a blessing. Um, I just realized that was not my thing pretty right away. Within the 6 months of being in the industry, I just did not feel at home. There was just something in me that knew that was not my path. But I also didn't know what other paths I could follow. And yeah, so the way that I kind of found myself into data design, it was really through just trial and error and trying many different type of jobs, um, and constantly just keep this kind of like inquiry um, mindset in my head and keep doing self-initiated projects. And eventually the right opportunity came through. That was actually with HarperCollins in 2013. After a number of years of having worked in advertising and different design studios, HarperCollins noticed my work, and they were like, we would like to have a chat with you about putting together a book of infographics, but rather than being just a random collection of infographic, we would like it to be narrative led. And I was like, me? Haven't worked in publishing, haven't ever created a book. But yeah, they saw The Shining. They show my thesis for the diploma was a gender stereotypes analysis on illustrated books for kids, where again there was this quest of investigation of like how do stereotypes translate in illustrated books for kids
That was
from a
beautiful.
woman and man perspective. And yeah, that was definitely the pivotal moment that got me into the right track, where basically I'm still here. Yeah, 13 years ago. The book,
That,
when
wa-
it came out, it gave me like this very physical and tangible business cards of like, I can do this stuff, and this is what I want to do.
that is really inspiring, actually, because, and I think that what's really nice for people who listen to this, especially younger people, is that you see, no one has it figured out from the start. None of us does. And it is amazing to find your path, even through not the quite right ones. And the influences that you mentioned are so important. I feel that our influences very often come from childhood. They never come from a later stage in life. You remember very basic things that stay with you and really shape the way you think. I find myself thinking about some movies that my dad showed me when I was 3 or 4, and I still remember them, and they really influence the way I think and I see the world. What I really like about what you said is that, and it's true, at LCC in London, there was this kind of really interesting point of view that they taught us, which was use design to solve a problem. It's not just about making things looking good, which of course it is as well, but you are solving a problem. You're solving a question. You're answering something that some people are asking, or maybe no one is asking and they don't know they need, but it always starts from try to solve something. And about that, I would like to ask you, can you tell us about a moment of breakthrough when you had a really moment, like a moment of where you were really stuck, and then you had this moment of breakthrough and thought, oh, I know exactly what to do, and how that came to your mind? Can you put your finger on something like that?
Well, I think a moment of breakthrough from a career point of view was definitely this opportunity with HarperCollins to create Infographic History of the World, right? Because it really like shifted my career path, and it actually showed me that there was a path, like I didn't really know that data visualization could have been a career, or infographic storytelling could have been just one focus journey to take on. But I would say that every project has moments of breakthrough, because as I was explaining before, we start with a question, but we don't really know where we're going, right? So there is always like this discomfort. And when you're working with data, a lot of this discomfort actually comes from the actual data, the stories that are hidden in the data. And there isn't like one way to give a voice to this story, one right way. There are always multiple ways, right? So I would say the discomfort often just comes from this kind of responsibility that the design process carries of like, how should I possibly best represent this data, knowing maybe the people that are suffering from this type of circumstances? Or because often actually with data visualization, we are narrating or we are conveying quite hard stories. There is a lot of hardship, there is a lot of like emotional connection that we're trying to unfold, and often you feel like you maybe don't have the lived experience or the right, to really give the right voice to the data. So I feel like often there is this moment of like, not sure if I'm even the right person, to work with this data, or if I can possibly even just sum it up. Or even just with David Bowie, actually a really light topic, right? Like just a song. But there was just so much in there, so much richness. How do you dilute it all to just like one project? Is it fair? Does it sum it up enough? There is always like this kind of like weight that you carry of like, is enough to really give justice, to the complexity that we're trying to represent? And just to give you maybe like a really tangible example, a year after the Infographic History of the World came out into the world, I decided to take one of the infographics that I created, Poppy Field, and repurpose it, or like re-edit it as an interactive. So we created poppyfield.org. I work with an extremely talented developer, a friend of mine, Nico, and the design was already set. It already circulated because it was already printed in the book. But just this weight of putting out there a website that actually depicted the costs of war of the last centuries with an image felt so limited, because behind every data point, every each poppy is a war, and it encodes the length of the war, but also the number of deaths, the geography. It just felt like such a reductive kind of like way of narrating all of this complexity. And I remember a couple of days before actually launching the website, it was meant to be for the centenary of the Great War in 2014, I called Nico and I said, Nico, I actually don't know if I can release this project, because I just feel like the weight of the story, me and the responsibility as the creator. I don't know, like it just felt like a lot. And Nico was like, like there is no one possible answer. And also other voices around me were like, this is one way of looking into it. This is one picture. It's not the ultimate picture of conflicts. Um, and you're just adding to the conversation. And then I think it was a moment of breaking through of this kind of like maybe insecurity, of this challenge, of this discomfort, this the responsibility that we're carrying of like needing to have the conclusive answer. There is no conclusive answer. That's what I've learned actually with this work that we're doing. And I suppose also translates to people that are maybe not working with data, with science. Maybe this weight doesn't carry as strongly, But I feel like in any sort of field, whether it's photography or graphic design or branding, there isn't just one perfect logo. Like every brand could be represented in a multitude of ways. Is one specific way of looking, is my point of view, is my frame, is what I can offer at this point in time. And then might evolve. Other people might actually take it and build on it. And that's actually the most beautiful realization actually that happened to this project. Is just like how, if we can do, obviously with ethics, like really considering the best possible understanding of this data and really try not to mislead people, or really not to, like to represent the science actually as it is, or the data as it is. What we can create is really like a connection and a dialogue starter, like this conversation started of like then people contributing. And when we released the project right away, it went completely viral on the first day. It was very topical because we released it on uh, the actual anniversary of the centenary of the Great War. And the poppy is a visual metaphor, but also is a sentimental kind of reference of remembrance in the UK. Is very linked to the First Great War. So it just went around massively. Like I remember I was freelancing for a design studio, and at 11 o'clock in the morning, we released at 7 o'clock. And I only just put it on 2 different channels that I had, Twitter maybe and Instagram or whatnot. But people really interacted with it. And at 11 o'clock in the morning, I received 2 calls on my private phone, and the phone wasn't even online. Somehow they found it. And there were 2 major newspapers, and they wanted to feature Poppy Field at the same day that he came out. And I was like, wow, this is actually the impact that your work can have when it's compelling, I suppose. It's not even beautiful. I think it needs to be compelling. It needs to have some sort of like emotional resonance. And
I
also, like, there
agree.
was something that you said before, Fabi, that I found that was really interesting. The way that you kind of like frame our work is that often it's not actually providing something unique. It's actually working with material that is already being used. For example, poppy, the poppy association to remembrance is widely used, right? So I didn't really do anything new. It's not that I was like associating new concept, creating a new way of looking at war. I just actually took something that was well understood and carried this emotional dissonance, right? The poppy is like this symbol of peace and life that carries blood, and the red of like the costs of the war from poetry in Flanders Fields. So I just borrowed that, the metaphor, that analogy, that oxymoron that was used in poetry, and then I brought it into statistics, into data. And that connection gave a voice to the numbers, right? In a way that I couldn't have possibly done it if I probably just had maybe invented my own metaphor, because the metaphor carried years of resonance, carried years of understanding.
I think that that's what amazing creativity is. I genuinely do. I think one of my favorite art directors is Brian Collins, and I saw him and met him many times. And one of my favorite projects he made was a rebranding for a little banking app that was rebranding. And what I love about him and his practice is that they have this massive library in New York, and all his designers starts from opening books. And what they did was rebranding this app, and without inventing anything new, they thought, who did visualize the future when no one knew what the future looks like? And they looked at Tintin and all the illustrations that they made. And you should see this branding is absolutely stunning. And the app and the brand went off the roof with with the success they had. But that's not even the point. The point is like what you did with the poppies. It is important the way you connect emotion. It is important the way you connect the feelings that people have to something. That's an incredibly unique skill, and that is something that is very personal, very particular to the person who does that, because not all people would see, like you were saying, not everyone would see the same topic starting from the same point. And that's also what's beautiful about creativity, that we could all start the same project and have 10 different results. And that's what amazes me about our job every day and continue to amaze me after almost 20 years that we're doing it. And that's also why I want to interview you and people like you, because it is remarkable to pick into people's brains and see how you see something. Another thing that I was thinking about while you were talking about Poppy is that I loved also another project that you did, which was the Me Too linked project. And I thought that also had incredible resonance, didn't it? Would you talk about that a little
Yeah, and
bit?
there was another one actually when we're talking about this moment of breakthrough and this moment of like discomfort of really like sitting with the weight of the data and the hardship, right? That these stories reveal. Like there we had about 1 million data points and reading through actually all of these so sorry, just going back, what is it? Me Too is an analysis of the Me Too hashtag, just taking in consideration one platform, which was Twitter at the time. We scraped the first 6 months since Alisa Milano first tweeted or invitation to share personal stories. Sorry, this is actually not sticking to my ear properly. Um, and After we gathered all of this data, I was working with an amazing collaborator, Lucia Konchinkova. She was taking on the kind of like more technical side of things because obviously working with a large amount of data, we needed to have a programmatic way to parse the data and to encode the data. It couldn't just be done manually. I'm a very analog person. I don't code. Um, and maybe we can talk about also creativity in the context of
Sense.
collaboration later. But yeah, just to kind of like finish the thread of thought when it comes to the moment of breakthrough. Again, approaching this with my own lived experience in the context of Me Too as sexual violence allowed me to just create a portrait that was very personal to me. So we created us three snapshots encoding different insights, the geographical spread, the most trending voices, but also the themes that emerged in this conversation or in these tweets, these testimonies. They were all anchored to this idea of dandelion. And dandelion for me was like my way to kind of like blow and hope for change, like the way that you do it when you pick up a dandelion and you just blow, hoping that this wish that you have in your heart, in your soul, might actually happen. And yeah, so I kind of like borrow from that, but also with this idea of like these voices, they feel very fragile when they're looked at individually, but when they came together, they were really a catalyst for positive social change. And what is the dandelion? It's a weed. Botanically speaking, it's not a flower, it's a weed. You don't want it into your garden because very soon it's going to take over, right? And that's actually the strength of these voices. If you were able to share, uh, even though it costs you a lot to, come out and 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 share your story, you were giving strength to another person to be seen and to share their own stories. And it became this like viral catalyst and social movement. And so yeah, that's how I basically like just looked into my own lived experience. I wanted to be part of this conversation. I wanted to give voice to these other voices with my work and amplify the reach, but also capture the importance of these voices, because you feel like whenever you're putting something on social media, it has a very kind of like finite time. So for me, it was almost like to create a time capsules of like all of these voices that will stay and other people can actually look at them and see them and investigate these tweets by overlaying in the interactive form. Um, Yeah, so there was another kind of like important, I suppose, like project of just like kind of overcome these responsibilities as a creator and just really thinking about this is my own way of seeing it. It's not the final answer.
Um, how has your idea of creativity, if it has changed over the years, has it? has your life have an influence? You mentioned your children, and we had Caroline Nietzsche as well on the podcast, who said since she had her daughter, her whole vision of everything changed. So I'd be
Yeah,
interested in listening
I
to your
saw
opinion.
Caroline's episodes, which I thought it was beautiful and fascinating, and I love actually hearing her perspective because it really reminded me of her. Haven't connected with her in a few years, and it really captured the essence of Caroline, the conversation. You did such an amazing job there. Um, Absolutely resonates massively how creativity kind of like expands to all layers of life, and really kind of transforms and changes and morphs with experience and with the kind of like the more you grow as a human, I feel like the more you grow as a creative being, right? Like it's all about connecting ideas. It's all about being able to maybe notice what others might overlook. That's what the creative process is. And you're taking influences, anything that kind of like surrounds you. And in my context right now are my kids that constantly point out things that I might otherwise overlooked because, I've been around them for 43 years, as long as I've been alive. So they're constantly just like making me see the world with their own lens, with their own questions. And it's beautiful. Like the other day, we were about to throw away a helmet, and helmet are not supposed to be fixed because obviously when they break, there is actually the engineering part, so you're not supposed to fix it, glue it, whatever. So I was like, okay, let's dispose this. And my daughter was like, no, let's do something before we throw it away. Let's build something. And I was like, okay, what can we do? Let's look at this helmet. How can we give it another form? And she was like, maybe it can become a pot. So, she flipped it upside down. And I was like, yeah, sure. We can actually fill it with ground and maybe put a seed on it. And actually, the thing that the strip can become something to hang it. So maybe we could make a hanging pot. And, like we create such a mess because we tried to paint it and then the soil was everywhere. But it was beautiful, just the kind of like connecting with this object and also like stopping from this kind of like moment of like just me throwing it away, and my daughter stopped me and she was like, we can create something with that. And yeah, so now we have a hanging helmet in our garden that might become a pot.
I love that. I also am a big fan of not throwing stuff away. I am not throwing anything away. I'm trying to buy as little as I can
Mm,
nowadays, to be as, eco-friendly as I can be. So I really try to recycle everything. I try
yeah,
to reuse, and so yeah, your daughter just, great job. I mean, it's inspiring, isn't it? So
it's so
talking about
inspiring.
new generations, what would be your advice to young people who want to start this career, or they want to just, develop their creativity, even just not
Mhm.
necessarily be a designer? What would be a piece of advice that you would give them?
Yeah, so this is something that I'm asked all the time when I lecture at university, and I have always a hard time to kind of like just give a conclusive answer. So I usually point to three things. Based on my experience, I think actually when you want to design or be creative, it can actually be very overwhelming, the creative process of like, what can I create? Because there are so many things, right? And you put
Yeah.
yourself under this massive weight of like the responsibility of deciding. So just really kind of like lighten up the process with the starting point just being, what do I want to understand right now? What matters the most to me? Really transforming this weight of like creativity with this ultimate form of innovation into just simply and humbling thinking, what do I want to understand better? Can be a first starting point. Second, design to connect. Another thing that often I feel like, especially when you're early on in your career, can be quite intimidating in such a way is defining your own or your own path, right? And actually having like a creative style or like a very kind of like defined look, I think it can be quite limitative. I would say, from the start. Something will eventually emerge. A voice that is very kind of like distinct to you will emerge eventually, but it's a cumulative kind of like experience that is not linear. So don't put too much weight into how much or how something should look, right? Like designing for like an aesthetic or kind of like vision doesn't quite work, in my opinion. Design to connect. So design and give voice to what you're designing, thinking about what do you want people to see, feel, and connect with. And it might be completely different from the project that you just created before starting this new project or what you're going to be doing next. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're creating like a portfolio of work that is very eclectic and very different, and maybe it's not very cohesive. And this might actually be like counterpoint to what maybe HR firms might tell you, to create your portfolio and to just have an established look and an established form. By my experience, I really think that it's all about actually your ability to connect the dots and to bring something to life, right? And it doesn't really matter if the aesthetic look or if the aesthetic form changes from project to project. In fact, I think it's actually the beauty of the process, not knowing where we're going. If we have an established style from the start, it will obviously confine us into something that is already predetermined at the start. So don't put too much weight into the kind of aesthetic. And then finally, like, try to change things for the better. Like if you can create something that makes people smile or provide this moment of joy, like my grandma, rather than just fixing a sandwich with processed foods, like tell the story of where these ingredients are coming from. Try to really nurture the soul and um and the kind of like mind of people. Connect the heart and the mind rather than just creating something that is like a dribble portfolio, that just looks like processed food, like another
Yeah,
thing that is just
for
doesn't have
sure.
any substance. Change something in everyday's life that can actually make the world a better way. And it doesn't need to be massive. It can just be like a really, really little thing. Think about not to create another process sandwich or create something that really um, fulfill multiple layers, not just the functional way of like acting and feeding yourself, but also feeding the mind.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. And on top of that, I'd like to add, be yourself.
Mm,
I think that in your career, especially, I saw your personal projects, all the stuff that you did as a side project has become a milestone in what you've done.
yeah,
So I know that not everyone has the time, not everyone has lots of resources, but always cultivate something that you really love
yeah,
because you never know what can come out of it. Maybe nothing. So also
100%. That's such a good
not having
advice.
expectation is also important because it
Yeah,
might be nothing, but who knows? Maybe it will be something to someone. And I think that lots of your projects came out from something you loved. And because you love them, because they are so Valentina, everyone else loved them as well.
yeah.
So,
I think if you create something that will satisfy your curiosity, other people, other humans will
yeah.
connect with because it will satisfy their curiosity. But also, I feel like what you said is really important of just being yourself and really try to not let the kind of like corporate work or this kind of like maybe experiences we are presented with in life with work kill the part of you that really keeps you bright and sparks and kind of like motivates you to do this job. Because I suppose if you are in this kind of like career of like wanting to create something, right? Creative work. You're not doing it for the money. I don't actually know anybody that started the design because he wanted to become a millionaire. It's
We
because you
didn't.
have this kind of like need of self-expression, of creating something, of problem solving. It's the way that your brain works, right? So really try to really think about your own values and what makes you you. Because also that's in this um, day and age of artificial intelligence, automation, and everything kind of like looking the same, this is where you're really going to be bringing something to the table that is different from anything else. Your own perspective, your own, beautiful mind and emotions, and they are just yours because of the life that you have experienced and the connections that you can draw. Um, these beautiful reservoirs of things that you can put together. That's yours. Nobody else. Nobody else is like you. So yeah, count on that.
Very true. Thank you, Vale. This was amazing. I would talk to you for 20 more years, but unfortunately we have work to do. So if you could please just tell people where they can find you, your works, your books, anything they want. And then I will also add it to the website and to the Instagram page of the podcast. But thank you so much. Thank you. That was fantastic.
Hey, thank you, Fabi. Thanks for having me. Thanks everybody for listening. If you want to find me, you can find me online on social media, on Instagram, LinkedIn. My website is apostrophe.one, where I share more about my work. I also publish some masterclasses. If you want to learn more about infographic storytelling and data visualization, I learn some public masterclasses. So come and join me.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Please, everyone, go find Valentina, find their work. It's absolutely unique and wonderful, and you will miss out if you don't. So thank you again, Vale, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you, Fabi. Such a pleasure. Thanks.